This is why, if you notice, all these Mughals also, because they were Persianized, they came from Persian culture, they're very interested in astrology. Astrology is not common in the Islamic world, but it is very common in Central Asia. Why? Because it is the influence of Iran and it is the influence of India. And they both believed in the Mahurat, in the Shubh Din, in the skies, in the celestial. We didn't have, for example, horses in India. Horses are not native. In fact, even after the Indo-Europeans came, even after the Greeks and Huns came, even after the Mughals came, horses would have to be imported in India because India's climate is such that horses don't naturally multiply. They're not disease-free. So we have to keep importing horses. But we know that the Indo-Europeans had horses, not only horses, but they had chariots. Whereas we don't find any such evidence in Indus Valley. So we don't find evidence of that.
Damn.
We don't find evidence of any town planning or modern cities in the after that period, after 1500 BC.
We'd invited Mohsin Raza Khan on the show to teach us about the history of Islam and Sufism. And that's how this particular conversation began. Eventually, we realized that it's a 101 on the history of religion in general. We've spoken about every religion that originated in Asia in this one. So if you're someone who enjoys knowing much more about culture, knowing about real history, unlike most history textbooks that are used in schools today, you've got to understand that history is fragmented. We're constantly rediscovering history. And the only way to know real, truthful, impactful history is by learning from the experts. Mohsin Raza Khan is one of those experts, one of the most well-read people we've had on the show. I'm sure he's going to become a TRS All-Star. We recorded another bunch of fantastic episodes after this one. Highly recommend that you watch this particular one till the end. For more episodes just like this, make sure you follow TRS on Spotify. We're a Spotify exclusive. Every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. Before I let you slip into this fantastic conversation, I want to highlight that our meditation app Level is now live on the App Store and the Play Store. We'll link it down below. Make sure you go download it. Make sure you begin your yoga, meditation, and health-oriented journeys. And now we have one of the year's best history episodes with Mohsin Raza Khan. Hello everyone, we have found a TRS All-Star. This is Mohsin Raza Khan. Sir, thank you for being on the show. When we had scheduled you as a guest, we thought we'll do a whole special on Islam. And the more I talk to you outside, the more I've gotten to know you. I feel that you have so many subjects to offer. You also told me that in order to truly understand the story of Islam, you need to understand what the world was like before Islam, Christianity, Judaism really originated. So I think for this episode, we're going to do a history of religions special. I want to begin with a simple question. How are you, sir?
I'm great and very happy to be here, Ranveer.
Okay, so we were having a very interesting conversation about Islam in general, the origins of it, and the nature of Arabia in general, the Gulf in general, before Islam. Where would you like to begin this story, sir? Because I think our listeners, our viewers, know a lot about Indian culture and Hinduism and Buddhism, but I was waiting for the right kind of guest to help us learn about Islam, and we're glad to have you on. So
glad to be here. So I would begin the story of Islam, in the pre-Islamic Arabia.
Okay.
That is, we don't know things for certain in antiquity, in the ancient world, when things happened exactly. And we believe that Prophet Muhammad was born around 570 CE, Common Era, or in the old way, AD. And what was Middle East like when he was born? What was especially that area which he was born? So today, Saudi Arabia, and even at that time, this Arabian Peninsula could be divided into a few parts. The two main parts are the Hijaz and the Najd. The Najd is the central desert, the area around Riyadh, etc. And the Hijaz is the Red Sea coast. So Mecca, Medina, Jeddah, they come in the area of Hijaz. So Prophet Muhammad was born in this area. He was born in Mecca in a tribe called the Quraysh. And within that tribe, there was a subgroup called the Banu Hashim, the House of Hashim. And he was born in it to a gentleman called Abdullah. His mother's name was Amina. And unfortunately, he was, or as fate would have it, he was orphaned. His father passed away even before he was born. Mother passed away at 6 years of age. He goes to live in the house of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, for 2 years. Then the grandfather also passes away. And he goes to live in the house of his uncle, Abu Talib. This is the story. Now, what exactly was the pre-existing religion of this part of the world? So these people would be normally categorized as paganism. That is, they believed in a large number of gods. They had a deity called Hubal, who was a Syrian god of the moon. They believed in 3 daughters called, derived from the Egyptian Isis, one of them. And
Was the Egyptian religion still around at this point, like in the Gulf as well?
very interesting. So Egypt had already by this time converted to Christianity, Coptic Christianity. But Egypt's influence had been there because these were neighboring civilizations. So their gods and goddesses, some of them had Arabian forms. In fact, it is believed that the Kaaba housed 360 idols. These 360 idols were idols of the various tribes that occupied Arabia. Most of this area was not settled territory. Arabs, that is Bedouins, were a tribal people. Each one had their own gods and goddesses. So what happened was that some of these Arabs had now become sedentary. They had settled down, some in Yemen, of course. Yemen had had a civilization for hundreds of years before that. But even in this area, that is in the Mecca area, Medina area, agriculture had arrived in some oasis towns. And then Mecca was, of course, a trading and religious center. So some Arabs or some Bedouins had settled down into sedentary life. And as you know, these are different stages of civilization. Tribal societies are usually considered more primitive. They are simpler. Life is more of a struggle. And once you get down to sedentary life, your life becomes more assured. You have assured sources of water, food, etc. Your prosperity increases. So your demands also change of your society. Your society becomes more hierarchical, and it's no longer equal in the same way. So what we have here is a large number of tribes. They are bordered by 2 large empires. One is the empire of the Iranians, Sasanian Empire. These are Zoroastrians. On the other side, you have the Byzantine Empire, that is basically a Eastern Orthodox Christianity. They occupy the areas of Syria, Palestine, all of that area, Anatolia, and also parts of Egypt. The Iranians occupy what is most of Iran all the way up to Iraq. This area is the area of Hijaz, Najd. This is ruled by local tribes. And below that, they have some kind of in Yemen, they already have some kind of civilization and kingdoms, etc. On the other side of the Red Sea also, you have Christians, because Abyssinia, which is today's Ethiopia, has already become Christian, and it has a Christian king, etc. So you have an atmosphere of quite a lot of diversity, I would say, multi-religious atmosphere. Christians and Christian communities are also there in Arabia, but more like individual Christians are there. But their Christianity would not be recognizable, say, to a European Christian, because they follow different sects, Nestorians, Coptics, etc. Zoroastrians are there in small numbers. And then large communities of Jews are there, because what has happened is that already the diaspora has taken place. That is, Jews have had 2 waves large, I'm talking about two large waves, there are others, of destruction. One was when the Babylonians, Nebuchadnezzar II, invaded Palestine, Israel, and he drove them out and took them as some of them as slaves. Then Cyrus the Great of Iran, Persia,
Who's shown in 300. I think his son is shown in 300.
a caricature of him. It's not really him, They made up much of 300 is kind of made up film.
Okay.
But yeah, kind of they denote him. So exactly, yeah.
This Cyrus name has come up a lot in my history books amongst my Parsi friends, of course.
Right.
He was a Zoroastrian king?
Yeah, and he was an amazing king, actually. People don't know his story. He was an amazing man because he did not use slave labor at all, which is very unusual in the ancient world. Okay, everybody, including from India to the West, everybody's using slave labor. You can call it by different names. You can call them dasas or whatever you want to call them. Okay, this guy never used slave labor.
Paid his army.
He paid every laborer, not just army. His laborers he paid, all who constructed everything. Not only that, he freed the Jews. So Jews had been brought as slaves by Nebuchadnezzar II to Babylon. He defeats Nebuchadnezzar, takes over Babylon, and he frees them. He says, you are free to go. So what happens is not everybody returns to Palestine or Israel. Many of them settle in our surrounding areas. Some of them come to Arabia also, settle in Medina, Mecca, etc., etc. And they are very skilled people because they are from a more advanced civilization. So they know agriculture, which Arabs don't. So they take over some of the best agricultural lands in the oasis in Medina. They take over. They are very good in jewelry and crafts, handicrafts. They're very good at making weapons because they come from more advanced civilization. So they have also learning. But really, the large wave of them comes in the second wave. That is when the Roman Empire, because the Roman Empire also, as I mentioned, took over all of this area: Egypt, Israel, Palestine, Syria, all of this area. So what they do is that there is a rebellion in Israel, and after the second or third rebellion, they just destroy the temple at Jerusalem and they expel all the Jews. That's how you get the Jewish diaspora in Europe, etc.
Okay.
And some of these diaspora Jews also come to Arabia and they settle in. So there's a two-wave migration. Some older, some later, but they are obviously, and they have writing. Arabs also have writing, but their Jewish script have a scripture. So every religion doesn't have a scripture. Now I'll get a little bit definitional. That is, what is scripture? Scripture is like the Bible, the Quran, the Vedas. Only more advanced civilizations, that is civilizations which have had agriculture, etc., and have writing and organized religion, they develop a scripture. Actually, the incident comes from Cyrus. One of the incidents comes from Cyrus. So around this, you can say, is around 500 BCE. And Cyrus says to the Jews that, where is your scripture? Do you have something in writing in your religion? And the Jews still don't have. They say, no, sir, we don't have a written scripture. That means it was still a largely oral tradition of the Judaic people. But in contact with the more advanced civilization, that is Iran, they also then codify their scripture and write down the Torah, etc. It may have come earlier, these stories, but they were not written down. Just like Homer stories. Homer stories initially were just oral stories. They were not written down. They were written down.
I think that's the case with most of the ancient world.
It was mostly oral. Even the Vedas, it's interesting, were orally transmitted. Yeah. So a Brahmin would sit with young Brahmin boys and he would instruct them to memorize and recite in a particular way. And that's why the recitation of the Vedas is more or less the same, whether you go to Kashmir or you go to Kanyakumari, because it has been orally taught in the precise way, the meter, and that's the way to preserve it.
How did the rest of the world, which is the Roman Empire, parts of Africa, the Gulf, maybe even Russia, how did all of them look at the Indian civilization? Was it truly as advanced as we're told? Because one thing I've learned about a lot of historians is everyone has kind of their own opinions on things. But I'd like to know yours as well.
See, there was not that much contact with India because India was quite far off from, say, Europe or China, and it was walled off by the Himalayas and huge seas, etc., and the Iranian Zagros mountains and all of that, Hindu Kush. So there was not that much contact, but there was also some contact. There were some Indian traders who would go into the Central Asia. There was Indians had also kind of become more inward looking. They were not because of the nature of the geography.
Yeah,
they were isolated, and India was a kind of a dweepa, an island kind of.
I believe they started looking eastwards.
Yeah. So what happens is that India really takes off with the arrival of Buddhism. Because as the Buddhism is a more of a missionary religion. See, some religions are not that missionary. Buddhism was a more missionary, so it used to send out monks. A lot of people got converted in Central Asia, in China, etc. And that also, and by this time also, the Greeks had arrived on our borders thanks to Alexander. So there was a lot of interaction with the Greeks, and the Greeks had a whole civilization because of Alexander's conquest, stretching across the Middle East into Europe, North Africa, etc. So thanks to the Greek kingdoms that came up, thanks to the Buddhists, and of course, it's not to say that there was not Hindu, what we today call Hindu. I mean, Hindu is a modern term, relatively speaking, comes from Persia. Let's call it Vedic civilization. This civilization also had a spread both to Southeast Asia with our traders, just as Buddhism spread to Southeast Asia from India. But also, we had a partner civilization. See, Persia is actually India's partner. We are actually two brothers from the same mother. Okay. That is, the two closest languages are ancient Persian, which is called, Zend-Avesta, and Old Sanskrit. So Old Persian and Old Sanskrit come from the same root, the Proto-Indo-European language.
Is it this? Is it the same as like how Zoroastrianism and Indian cultures have a lot of parallels?
This is the reason, because they come from the same root. So actually, what was the Vedic religion originally? It was a fire sacrifice religion. There were no temples. People used to sit around a fire, have grass on which you would be seated, and pour sacrifices into the fire. The smoke of the sacrifices would go to your ancestors and to the devas. Devas means the same word as deus in Greek, the shining ones. The root is the same, Indo-European, Old Indo-European. Devas is deus. And it's going to your ancestors. So that's why Iran's ancient religion was also a fire religion, because they come from the same source. What happens is that a prophet emerges in Iran called Zarathustra. We don't know the exact date. Could be as early as 1000 BC. We don't know.
Is this Zoroaster?
Zoroaster, which we now know as Zoroaster. So Zarathustra was actually a predecessor for all the Semitic religions. By which I mean he was a predecessor for Judaism, for Islam, and for Christianity. Why? Because he's the first guy who says, I'm a prophet, a kind of prophet, a messenger from God. He says that there are two forces, good and evil, in the world. Yeah. But they come from the same source. The original Zoroastrianism believed that there was a person in the sky called Ahura Mazda. This word is very interesting because Ahura comes from Asura, the same root. In Persian, the word S could not be pronounced and it was replaced by H everywhere. So Asura becomes Ahura. That means you can imagine that their original religion before Zoroastrianism, no, there's nothing original, but their earlier religion, let's put it this way, was similar to Vedic Hinduism. Because Asuras are in Vedic, and their gods also have the similar names, Mitra, Varuna, so they have the same kind of gods, Indra, that we in India's Vedic civilization had. The early Vedic civilization.
I think we're talking about the seed religion, which was common to both India and Persia.
So they are actually like our brothers in that sense, civilizationally speaking. Yeah. So the thing is, and this is why, if you notice, all these Mughals also, because they were Persianized, they came from Persian culture, they're very interested in astrology. Astrology is not common in the Islamic world, but it is very common in Central Asia. Why? Because it is the influence of Iran and it is the influence of India. And they both believed in the Mahurat, in the Shubh Din, in the skies, in the celestial bodies, and everything would be done according to that, predictions would be made. And that's why they had very good relationships, the Mughals, with Hindu Pandits, astrologers, with even some Hindu sects like the Gorakhnathis, etc. So even when Zoroaster comes, he doesn't completely destroy the old religion, because nothing comes out of nothing. Everything has a past from which a new thing evolves. So he keeps the fire religion, the fire sacrifice, but he transforms it. That's why the Parsis also have fire temples where the fire is burning. Fire is very critical. For us also in India, Agni is very important. The sacrifice to Agni. In fact, Agni is so important that no ceremony can happen, not marriage can happen, not death can happen, not any of the sacrifice can happen without Agni. In fact, Agni is so important that North India would not exist without Agni. Because when the Aryans came originally, this whole Gangetic Valley, this is another part of our environmental history that we don't know. The whole Gangetic Valley was covered in thick forest. And hunter-gatherers or ancient men, even nomadic people, did not have the power to chop down millions of acres of forest. So what would they do? They would set it on fire. We burned down millions of acres of forest to make it into farmland, rich farmland. And that's how the Indo-Gangetic Valley was cleared. There were two paths that the Aryans took. One was called the Uttarapath, starting from whatever, Punjab, Haryana, stretching up to Bengal. The other is called the Dakshinapath. That is, again, starting from Punjab, Haryana, but coming down through Gujarat into Maharashtra and south. So these were the two routes that they took. But this route was relatively okay. There was not that much vegetation. But that one required Agni, and that's why Agni is so important. So yeah.
I have some questions, sir. And I'm asking you these questions because till this point, we've only had historians on the show who are completely against the Aryan theory. And for me, the show is a medium to learn myself. Like, it's replaced my need for books. I barely read books. I talk to experts instead because I feel you guys have filtered knowledge from thousands of books that you've read. You as a guy, when you're thinking, you look down. So they say that people who look towards the side learn because of hearing. People who look up, like myself, learn because of visual. And people who look down learn through books. So I would like to know, from all the books that you've read, if the Aryan theory is true. And I'm not countering you here. I'm just trying to grasp.
If you're countering me, it's even better. So my students counter me all the time and I love it.
No, but I want to know more about it.
Sure. So first of all, this term Aryan has become sort of unacceptable since Hitler abused it so much. So we use the term Indo-European more commonly.
Okay.
And there's a lot of now evidence both from genetic studies and linguistic studies. These are the two major forms. That is, through linguistic studies, as I mentioned, we have been able to figure out where do languages originate, roughly, and how they evolved. So we know that there is an Indo-European group of languages which spreads or stretches from Bangladesh in the east all the way to Ireland in the west, geographically. That is, there was some Proto-Indo-European language from which these emerged. They mixed with local tongues maybe, but they emerged from there. For example, in India, we use the sound Ra. Now, Ra is not an Indo-European sound. It comes most likely from Dravidian.
Okay.
The word Ra. कहते हैं ना, खड़ा है, and stuff like that.
Or the R in Marathi, or I believe even Malayalam has a R.
Yeah. So all of those are not Indo-European. They're not found in other Indo-European languages. So we assume that it was from a local tongue. Now, this language, Proto-Indo-European, probably emerged around the Caspian Sea area. One theory is it emerged around the Caspian Sea.
Where is that geographically? Russia.
You could say, southern Russia. You could say, the steppes somewhere around that area, around the Caspian Sea, the southern Russia, you would say, around that area. Or northern Anatolia, also northern Anatolia.
Turkey, Russia.
Yeah, that border area, around just north of the Caucasus, around that area. What we believe is that some groups went to the west, and from there emerged the European languages, Greek, Latin, Germanic languages, etc., Slavic languages. Celtic languages, all the way up to Ireland. A second group came, what is called the Indo-Persian group, Indo-Iranian group, from which emerges all of these languages, ancient Iranian, Pashto, the Kurdish language. And in fact, you would be surprised that the first time we hear of Sanskrit is not in India. The first we find written is from northern Syria. That is, kings such as Assurbanipal. From their names, you can recognize that they would have common ancestors with Indian Indo-Europeans, Assurbanipal, etc., and all that, all the way up in Mesopotamia and Syria.
As in, like, the evidence we found.
So there are two kinds of evidence. One is linguistic evidence. So what we do is we do computer modeling.
Okay.
They try to retrace, depending on the language connections, where the proto-language must have come from. So, for example, there will be some connection. The Indian Indo-European languages, such as Gujarati, Marathi, Punjabi, etc., Bengali, and all, they're all related. In Hindi, we would say these are Apabhramsh. That is, these are Prakrits. That is the Sanskrit mixing with the the Proto-Sanskrit mixing with the local tongues
Hmm.
and its local variations becomes Gujarati somewhere, something. So these are, and they're related to each other. That is why many Indians can, at least in the border areas, understand each other, because these languages are
Cousins of each
cousins
other.
of each other. Whereas it would be difficult to understand the Dravidian languages for an Indo-European speaker if he is not familiar with it.
Hmm.
And of course, similarly, the Dravidian languages also, though they are distinct, there's some connection between them as a group of languages. And by the way, there are, just to explain to you, that actually at some point, the Dravidian languages probably covered the whole of the Indian subcontinent, including Pakistan, including North India. How do we
Really?
know this? We know this, yeah, because there are still islands left of Dravidian languages. There is an island of Dravidian language in Balochistan in Pakistan. It's called Brahvi. Brahvi is a Dravidian language, but it's still spoken by small groups of people in Balochistan. And we can imagine that at some time it was more, in the past, it was more widespread. Similarly, in the
So,
Indo-Gangetic plain.
Basically, it's a language something like Tamil or Malayalam, but spoken in Pakistan.
Yes. And in fact, even in the Indo-Gangetic plain, there is a language called Malto.
Okay.
I don't know if it's still spoken, but it was spoken until fairly recent times. And Malto, again, is a Dravidian language. So we know that, in fact, also many of the languages spoken by tribals are usually... so there's a third group of languages also in India. It goes by different names, but some people call it the Khmer group because it is related to what's spoken in Khmer in Cambodia. It's a eastern group of languages. So you can find them also among tribal populations in India. And some tribal populations speak some kind of a mixture of Khmer and Dravidian. That means these population groups and these people were there for a long time, possibly before.
With the Aryan invasion theory, I think the counter to that theory is that during the last ice age, basically most of the earth was not habitable. So people settled along the Persian stretch and in India. And then once the ice age started withering away, people started going to Europe.
Okay.
So I don't, I mean, this is the theory that has come up on the show a lot.
Okay.
I would like to know what you think, because I think your theory is that when you get out of Africa, you settle down at the Caspian Sea, and then two groups emerge from
don't know. No, I'm not saying we get out of Africa and settle at the Caspian Sea. So we don't know what the proto-origins of these people are.
Okay.
So out of Africa, we may have come, considering we have found skeletons that are, 200,000, 100 to 200,000 years old. And we have now recently, in fact, in Morocco, found skeletons which are maybe 300,000 years old. So human origins, which were considered only to be about 100,000 years, have now been pushed back to about 300,000 or more. And out of Africa, several waves have come out of Africa also. Several waves have come out. And there are all kinds of speculations also now, because Neanderthals were already occupying parts of Eurasia even before Homo sapiens arrived. When we are talking about humans, we are actually talking only about Homo sapiens sapien, right? When we are saying 100,000, 200, 300,000. But even older than that are other humanoids, such as Neanderthals, such as... there are so many.
Yeah, people don't understand is that there was a whole phase in history where Homo sapiens coexisted along with all their cousins at the same time.
Yeah.
So you would see humanoids like yourself just nearby.
Slightly different from you, but
slightly different from you.
Because Neanderthal won't look exactly like a Homo sapiens sapien, nor would a Denisovian look like one. And there are others also. But possibly we eliminated them. Or in fact, the theory is that we also crossbred with them, the females of the species at least, because their DNA is present in us, in our DNA. How they arrived and what happened here exactly. But we know that there was a complete change in India's civilization. That is, Indus Valley was a very advanced civilization. There was plumbing, indoor water, there was a lot of trade, ships, manufacturing of goods, highly complex agriculture, beautiful town planning, citadels. I mean, the works. It was just as advanced as anything, say, in Mesopotamia, etc. But we suddenly find cities disappear. How do we know this? Because historians, archaeologists dig straight down. And each layer of the earth tells you about a period of human civilization. So you can therefore know by how much you're digging as to what date you are at. And you can also do carbon dating for that, which is a different process. You can, once you dig up, you uncover both inorganic matter, that is artifacts, etc., which can help you date. and you know what is the sophistication of the civilization of its settlements, etc. You can also look at organic matter, because you can look at what grains they were eating, what how those grains were cooked or not cooked. You can look at, I mean, a variety of the remains of their domesticated animals. You can look at. So what we discover is actually cities disappear in India. We don't find cities after around 1500 BCE. That means it's a civil. Now what is happening is that civilization has probably reverted to something more simpler, maybe a village life or maybe a nomadic life or whatever. We don't find evidence of large scale cities. Now, unless somebody discovers that, somebody digs up and shows us that, we believe that there has been a change.
There must have been some big events, possibly cataclysmic.
Yes, of course, but we don't know. We can't say unless we have the evidence. So yes, you're right. This could be a very plausible explanation.
I'll give you my romantic theory. And this is a theory not shaped from just the people who talk about Indian history and culture. Even when I've spoken to archaeologists who have studied Africa through the show, and this is just stuff I've learned through the show, I feel civilization is much older than we think.
Could be.
The truth is that things just get destroyed over time. Like the only things that actually can survive the test of time are stones, like the pyramids, like ancient stone structures. And I also constantly feel that there are regular cataclysmic events because of which civilization just gets boiled down to simplicity.
Very well true. Could be possible. But the thing is that, it would leave some physical trace. So, I mean, once you start digging, you would find some trace, even if the culture is not literate. So first of all, you could find script, you could find fragmentary evidence. Even if you don't find that, you could find objects, pottery, etc. You could find grains, as I said, organic matter. If you're not finding anything, then to speculate that it was destroyed and recreated, I mean, then you can believe in anything. We have to believe, at least I would, and most scholars would like to base their theory on some kind of evidence, some kind of.
Do you think the Indian government needs to do more work in terms of digging?
Yeah, in fact, it should open India up to not only Indian scholars, but to from all over the world. Let them come, let them dig. That in fact, most of our history is because of the British. Yeah. They are the ones who discovered Indus Valley. They are the ones who discovered Ashoka. We didn't know about Ashoka. They are the ones who deciphered the scripts. They are the ones who dug up the monuments. They are the ones who told us. So, if they were, so dangerous for us. And I agree with some people who say that, look, the history writing was done a bit from the British perspective. Okay. But they also laid the foundations for what we have today. We didn't know about Ashoka. Ashoka was forgotten in India. Yeah. So was the Indus Valley.
It makes you think of how many other kings or kingdoms or teachings are also forgotten.
Though a lot of it now we have also rediscovered. So since then, we have also done a lot of work. So it's not like we have just completely forgotten. We're not depending only what the British did. We have our own scholars have been working on this.
Which is why rather than attaching emotional or religious angles to history, you should attach research, evidence, more investment in archaeology.
Exactly. We need more young minds, more well-trained scholars, more skilled people to look at it. Technology, use technology. So we don't use these terms anymore, Aryan invasion, etc. But Indo-Europeans came. We know this from the physical evidence. We know from the changes that have taken place to the physical evidence in the landscape. We know it also from their evidence that we didn't have, for example, horses in India. Horses are not native. In fact, even after the Indo-Europeans came, even after the Greeks and Huns came, even after the Mughals came, horses would have to be imported in India because India's climate is such that horses don't naturally multiply. They're not disease-free. So we have to keep importing horses. But we know that the Indo-Europeans had horses, not only horses, but they had chariots. Whereas we don't find any such evidence in Indus Valley. So we don't find evidence of that.
Damn.
We don't find evidence of any town planning or modern cities in the after that period, after 1500 BC. So there's a range of, plus the language. The language is the biggest giveaway.
Which makes me think that all these stories we read about in Amar Chitrakatha with horses, then where did the horses go? And where did they come from that time? If those Amar Chitrakatha stories are truly tens of thousands or lakhs of years old.
I'll tell you something so amazing that even, kingdoms in the south of India, Vijayanagaram, etc., Kakatiyas, etc., they would import horses. There would be thousands of Turks living there in the Deccan because they were bringing the horses there. They were also serving as soldiers. We have a much longer history than we imagine with Central Asia, with others, etc. And it's not just the Indo-Europeans coming. After that also there have been many waves of invasions. The Huns came in, the white Huns, which we call in India. The term for Hun is in West is, you must have heard it's Scythian or Scythian. But in India we call them Saka or Shakya. In fact, Buddha is called Sakya Muni. He's the Muni of the Sakyas, which is interesting that they had spread so far. That is all the way up to Bihar and Nepal they had spread.
Where are the Huns from geographically?
So there are two types of Huns, the white Huns and the others. And they basically come from Central Asia. And they invaded not just India, they invaded Iran, they invaded West Ukraine, they invaded all of this area. So we have a much longer history of, and the Greeks arrive and, they are at our borders and they come in. So there have been waves of people coming in. And at some point, even the Dravidians must have come in, right? It's not like maybe they took the coastal route, along the coast. Even before the Dravidians, there are other people that arrived, which the kind of people that you sometimes find on the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and you also find them in parts of interior forests of India. So you have waves of people coming in, So humanity there's nothing such as pure humanity or purity of a civilization, etc. It's all a mixture.
Yeah, I think religion, if you read Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, he keeps saying how all religions, irrespective of what your religion or your belief is a way to control large masses of people. And at some point you have to detach yourself from what you emotionally feel for your own religion and look at human history in a scientific manner as human history. Look at it unemotionally, look at it from an archaeological, evidence-based perspective. And that's how you'll get a deeper learning of yourself as a human being. So that's the only kind of cautionary sentence I want to put out there for our listeners, because I know that there's a lot of people who are completely closed down to all these ideas you're pitching. And in saying that, I want to say that you're one of the most interesting guests I've ever had on the show. So we began speaking about the pre-Islamic world, and we've gone right up till India and Amar Chitra Katha. So I got to bring you back to the Gulf.
But India is part of the pre-Islamic world. This is the most interesting one. See, this is what I'm saying, everything is connected. I mean, how do you expect that the Khmer tongue and Austro meaning Eastern Asian tongue, is being spoken in India? That means at some point there was a migration from there, correct?
From where?
From somewhere there in Southeast Asia or whatever. Because if people in the northeast of India and the east of India also are speaking a Khmer related language, that means things are mixed, things are not this crazy search for purity everywhere, and it's everywhere, it's in United States nowadays. The whole Trump thing is actually about purity, right? The whole thing is that whites are realizing, especially lower income whites. So it's partly economics, that is, they feel left out. Second, they also feel that their nation is changing in a way that they can't recognize. The browning of America, as they say.
As Russell Peters says, eventually all of us are going to be beige.
Yeah, I hope so.
That's what happens in history, right? Like eventually you all just form one big globule, which is why I think if you study the Indian gene code, we're a very complex mix. Yes. It's probably why we're the earliest to become beige.
Exactly. India is one of the most mixed. You're absolutely right. And what we have to understand is that, look, how is our language, by languages I mean, say these North Indian Prakrits that we speak of, how are they so closely related to Persian or to Pashto, etc.? We have to try to understand this. It can't be a fluke, right? There must have been some kind of so computer modeling can tell us actually how these languages go back. You can do a retracing of the language, how these Prakrits emerged, and how, at what point must Sanskrit have split from Old Persian, Old Zendavest, that Old Persian language, and Old Sanskrit, how they must have split, how before that there must have been a Proto-Indo-European language from which the Western Indo-European split. That is the Greek, Latin, etc. When they split, when you keep recreating, you go to that area around the Caspian Sea, and also, of course, you have physical evidence also, because you have burial chambers, you have jewelry, weaponry, chariots. When you dig, you find there. So you have the remnants of the culture, the physical remnants of the culture. You have the linguistic evidence of the culture. Otherwise, how do you have Sanskrit being written in northern Syria? Now you can take a nationalist position and you can say this is all rubbish, and actually everything came out because of the ice age from India, but kind of the computer modeling on linguistics or the physical evidence doesn't testify.
Like the moment you completely discount any theory, your capacity to learn also stops. That's what I feel.
Exactly.
Like just keep yourself open, keep room for changes even in the mindset that you've already adopted completely.
Correct.
Which is why I struggle a lot to talk to a lot of older folks in India for some reason. And I'm not just talking about right-wing folks or left-wing folks. Everyone who's older
wants to be set in their ways. You see, and by older I mean actually it starts pretty early. It starts in your teens itself. The most open are children, okay, then teenagers, and then youth. Because the older you get, the more set you are in your ways. And there is a concept we use it in IR also, in international relations, called ontological security, cognitive security. Now, I know I'm using very complex words.
No, go for it.
But ontology just means reality. So what is your view of reality? So what does religion do? Religion gives you a view of reality, what is real and what's not real. For example, we find ourselves, as the German philosopher Heidegger used to say, thrown into the world. That is, when we awake, we find ourselves in the world as a stranger, right? So what do? We take whatever our parents and our societies told us about reality and accept that, because it tells us a story and it quietens our disturbance, our agitation, so that there's no cognitive dissonance, so that now we feel calmer. This is a story of how this camera came into existence, you came into existence, I came into existence, these plants, animals. I have a story of reality. This story of reality is what gives us security. Now, the moment this is questioned, this creates ontological insecurity and a cognitive dissonance. This psychologists are finding out, psychiatrists are finding out, is actually as painful as physical pain. It's almost like somebody has taken a knife and run it through your body. If I tell you that your view of reality is actually a lie.
Yep.
Now, it could be any view of reality. It could be a view of reality that comes through religion or through nationalism. The moment you find out there's something wrong with it, it disturbs you. You can't sleep at night. You don't feel good anymore. Some people commit suicide. It is so disturbing for some people. So now the thing is, I had a different training on nature, you could rather say. I had my nature is to look at hard things. I have the ability to look at hard things and to look for truth, or as far as one can achieve the true picture of reality. Even if it makes me feel deeply uncomfortable, I was willing to face up to it.
I think discomfort is the key to learning more.
Exactly. You have to get out of your comfort zone to learn anything. It will make you uncomfortable to look at these facts. But you have to say, okay, what is reality? How close can I get to the truth? However much closer I can get, I should do it. And you should have courage. So even the Greeks believed that the first virtue, which is required for all their other cardinal virtues, the Greeks had 4 or 5 cardinal virtues, but the first virtue is courage. Because without courage, you can't do anything.
Yeah. You have so many podcasts in you, Mohsin. So we gotta come back.
Exactly.
Come back.
So let's get back to Zarathustra, because he is the dude. He is the original man. He is the first prophet, as I explained to you. In fact, the Jews and the Christians and the Muslims owe to him, because he's the first guy who's saying, look, I've brought a message from God. God is Ahura Mazda, as I said, and the story begins from there, because it's actually Asura Mazda, because they don't have the word. As I said, Sindhu becomes Hindu. The name comes from Persia, because the river Sindhu, they could not pronounce the S, so they changed it to H. Similarly, Ahura Mazda. Now, Ahura Mazda is this god, but he has 2 forms, 2 natures in the original Zoroastrianism.
I have to give some context to the listeners here.
Sure.
So basically, if you study things like the Vishnu Puran or Shiv Puran, they talk about Devas and Asuras as being 2 enemies. So again, I've tried digging up the truth through the podcast, and what I've figured is Devas, as we call it, were probably a set of kings or leaders of tribes on this side, which is geographically India. and asuras could have been kings on that side of the Indus, which is very likely Persia. And even if you actually study the Asura culture in the Puranas, you'll see that even they prayed to the same gods like Shiva, like Vishnu, Brahma, etc. So my reading here is that for us as Indians,
But-
they were the enemies, and for them as Persians, we were the enemies. And even if you read the Vishnu Puran, eventually the Asuras and the Devas also work together.
But let me just clarify one thing. Shiva is not a Vedic god. Shiva is a god who emerges later. Therefore there are Pashupati, that seal that has been found,
Yeah.
which we call the Pashupati seal, has the image of that yogi with the bull's horns.
Yeah.
And we say that might have been, say, a proto Shiva.
Hmm.
But he's not found in the Vedic pantheon, the Rig Vedic pantheon. The closest we can find is Rudra as a cognate of Shiva. That is, we find Indra there, we find Agni, we find Mitra, but we do not find Shiva, etc. So, and even Vishnu is not the way we imagine Vishnu. Vishnu actually in the original story, is a dwarf, divine one who works with the gods. So Deva, the roots of Deva, the etymological roots, comes from the same root as Deus. Deus in Greek meaning God. Devas also meaning the same thing, the shining ones. Devas, who give off light. And actually Asuras also were a divine being. They were not evil originally. In the later versions, they become Asuras become evil, etc. So Ahura Mazda, therefore, is not a bad, he's a good force, he's a god. Zoroaster is his prophet, Zarathustra. And he also is predicting the birth actually of a messianic leader who will come after him, born from a virgin. So you can see that the Christian myth is already there in what Zarathustra is saying.
Wow.
And Zarathustra is also saying that, look, there is good, there is evil. These are these two forces, the forces of light and darkness. They fight with each other in creation. And in the end, of course, light will win over. Also, he talks about the day of judgment. And he also talks about heaven and hell. So he's given you the basic framework of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Which year is this in roughly?
We don't know exactly. Could be around 1000 BCE. Could be up or down a little bit. And so he's given us heaven and hell. He's given us the day of judgment, the basics of Islam also, the basics of Christianity and Judaism. He's given us all of these things. And it makes sense that the Jews were actually slaves in Babylon. So they were exposed to this story. Nebuchadnezzar II had enslaved and taken them there. And Cyrus the Great freed them. So they were familiar with this story, you see. And therefore you can find fragments of that in their own versions. And that's how they also write down the story. Their written scriptures appear only after that, not before that.
And Moses was when?
So again, we don't have any physical evidence of Moses, no historical evidence, just like we don't of Jesus.
Moses is the origins of Judaism. Origins?
One version of the story. So there are two, now scholars believe that these were two independent stories. One origin story is of Abraham. So one group, and they believe this could be the group that went to Babylon. And some were enslaved in Egypt. The ones which were enslaved in Egypt, Jews, have Moses as their original origin story, as their leader, as their prophet, etc. The other group has Abraham.
Why don't you do a bit of a 101 of Jewish history, or just very quick, so people understand even Judaism, because I feel it has a very key role to play in this story as well.
Sure. So, I'm just going to dovetail it into the Zarathustra story. Zarathustra, once he emerges as a prophet, he changes Iran's religion, but not completely, as I mentioned. Fire still continues to be an integral part of that religion, and many of the rites are there. After him, this religion develops different sects. Two of the most prominent sects are Manichaeism of Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism and Mazdakism. Manichaeism believes again in two forces, good and evil, and they fight with each other. And you see, this good and evil is very interesting, because the evil part, that is Ahriman, is the force of darkness and evil in Zoroastrianism. He's actually the prototype of Satan, of devil, Shaitan. He has exactly those qualities. So you can see how this is coming into other religions also from there. Right? Interesting. And The good guy is actually another name for Aura Mazda. That is Ordzman. I don't know how to pronounce this name. But is so. And then you have these two forces of good and evil, black and white. That's why we say don't be Manichaean when we say in English. We mean don't see the world only in black and white. The world is grey. It's not just black and white. So, but it comes from that one of the sects of Zoroastrian. Now, Judaism has very complex origins, and it's not actually clear what it is. They are clearly, again, a Semitic people. Semitic people being the 2-3 branches. One is the Arabs, that is the Arabic language. The other Semitic language is Hebrew. And the third Semitic language, which many people believe, is the Berber language spoken in North Africa. The Berbers in Morocco, in Algeria, etc. So these Semitic people, some people who lived in this area, which is now Israel, Palestine, in those days, there used to be different names.
By Semitic, you mean Jewish?
This is how we perceive it now. But actually, technically, the term Semitic means Arab and Jewish. Okay. So when you say, but because in Europe, the only Semitic people that existed were Jews. So we say, oh, Semitic is Jew, anti-Semitic is anti-Jewish. But actually, technically, Arabic and Hebrew are sister languages. They are distinct from the Indo-European group. They are a different group of languages. It's called the Semitic group of languages.
Today, when we say the word Semitic, it usually means Jewish, but historically, it means probably kind of Arab.
Yeah, correct. So they are cousins. So they are part of the same group, okay. Semitic group. So these people were most likely, like everywhere else, their main religion was animistic, pagan. They worshipped, various things, various kind of idols. Now, at some point, the idea of one God took over. And as I said, one version could have been coming from Zarathustra. But see, nothing is coming out from nothing. Even Egypt, some of the Egyptian pharaohs also had this concept of one God. Okay, Ramses, etc. So they should be one God. Now there is a technical term for this. There is slight differences. One is monotheism. There's a second term called henotheism. Henotheism says that you believe in a supreme God. They can be subordinate gods, many gods, but you believe in one superior God or supreme God. That is henotheism. The term coined by Max Muller, the German scholar. So slowly you don't make a transition from so many gods to one God in one shot. You have many gods, and from there you have one God with subordinate gods, and then slowly the subordinate gods disappear and you have one God. So you make a gradual transition.
Over thousands of years.
Hundreds or thousands, whatever, yeah, depending on your circumstances.
Okay.
So the Jews made this transition at some point, slowly. And they claim that they had this leader called Moses on this side and Abraham on this side. Of course, there are no records. Just like actually we don't have any records even for, say, the Buddha or even for Jesus. In their lifetimes, there is no record of these people. These are, we don't know exactly who they were. We can't say with precision what the written record says, because just record keeping was not that advanced, and we don't have surviving records for these people. So we've tried a lot to find evidence for Moses. In fact, Israeli scholars have tried a lot, Israeli archaeologists, historians, but they've found no evidence so far, or for Abraham. But these two different origin stories emerge. Abraham and his children, Isaac and Ishmael. That is, Isaac is supposed to be the ancestor of the Jews. Ishmael is supposed to be the ancestor of the Arabs. This is the Arab version of it. The Jews only consider themselves to be children of Isaac. But there's the other story that, no, we are the children of, we are part of the group which was led by Moses and his son Aaron. So there are these different origin stories are there. But at some point, you have this kingdom emerges. Okay, we have some evidence of one of the Jewish prophets. So many, right? There's King David, the guy who was small and defeated the Goliath, the giant, and then his son Solomon. In Islam, we say Dawood and Suleiman.
From what I understand here, and this is from my childhood, okay? So we used to have book fairs, and my mom wanted to get me into reading, and I didn't read. I used to actually watch a lot of TV shows, and it was a great decision back then. I learned a lot. Either way. She wanted me to understand Christianity. So she bought me a children's version of the Bible that had the New Testament, which had all of Jesus Christ stories and Christianity in general. And it had the Old Testament, which was all the stories related to Judaism. And that book had a huge impact on how I perceive general world history, because you learn so much about Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism here. You even learn about Islam in our history books. You don't really learn about Christianity and Judaism.
They're very important.
Yeah. And so I got to learn about Judaism through the Old Testament and of course Christianity through the New Testament. And as I grew older, I realized that people don't talk about the Old Testament anymore in the modern world. Even Christians talk primarily about the New Testament. So what I understand about Judaism is that it's a collection of learnings from the Old Testament, in the same way that possibly Hinduism is a collection of learning from all the scriptures that we have, the Vedas, the Upanishads. Am I correct in saying it, or is this a wrong thought?
No, you are pretty accurate. The only correction I would make is that we don't use the term Old Testament anymore. Scholars use the word Hebrew Bible, because otherwise it feels like, oh, they are old. That is, they are just another version and we are the new. It tends to denote, like Old Testament, New Testament, the terminology tends to denote like this is more new and therefore it's more legitimate. You are old and you are therefore illegitimate.
But isn't old a good thing in some cases?
So I don't know, but the scholars use the word Hebrew Bible now for that.
Hebrew Bible.
The Hebrew Bible.
So
yeah.
Judaism is a collection of lessons and learnings from the Hebrew Bible.
The Jewish religion, that is Judaism, has an origin story like every religion. And the origin story starts with Adam, Eve, etc. We know the story. And then there are different prophets who come at different times. Why does Adam come? Again, he's originally in paradise, he's happy, so is Eve. But they taste the forbidden fruit, because the prehistory of that is that God made many angels, but after that he made man, and one of the angels refused to bow in front of man. He said, "This is your creation, why should I bow?" That angel called Lucifer becomes Satan, and he refuses to bow. Shaitan, correct?
I love how languages are so linked.
Yeah.
But anyway, go on.
Yeah, but they are also Semitic, right? So Arabs also have the same root language as Jews.
Yeah, I'd always
Hebrew.
question that, how do my Muslim friends know so much about the Old Testament? Now, as I've grown older, I've understood that, oh, okay, there are Old Testament lessons across Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and they're respected lessons.
Yeah. And I mean, there are slight differences in these lessons. I'll also explain that. They're not exactly the same, but yeah, the origin story is again coming from Judaism.
In the same way that Zoroastrianism, which is Parsis, and modern day Hindus kind of have a common seed religion, which we don't even know about, because it probably was a very elaborate religion, which is now lost, because of time.
Yeah.
And Zoroastrians think their religion is the most ancient. Hindus think their religion is the most ancient. But there's probably a seed religion which is more ancient, which we don't know about. We don't know what it was called.
Even Hinduism that we talk of today is not actually the Vedic religion. The Vedic religion is different, right? Hinduism also. Because the Vedic religion is, as I told you, the gods are different. Indra, Mitra, Varuna, Agni. Whereas today, now the chief gods are different. They are actually Vishnu, Shiva. So, and their avatars, etc. So it's a very different religion from what the Vedic. Now we have temples. They had no temples. They had only the fire sacrifice. So it's a very different. Religions also change over a period of time.
Yeah. In the same way, the Abrahamic religions, maybe they had some other ancient ancestor, origin religion, which followed aspects of the Old Testament.
As I told you, their original ancient religion is basically either Zoroastrianism or some forms of Egyptian religion. That is, at some different points of time, Egypt also had monotheism in different dynasties. So their roots could have come from there. Because we know that the Jews and the Arabs both were pagans. They were both animistic people. We know that.
I thought I knew so much about religion, so I'm grateful for this podcast. I've got to learn so much, man. Not the end of the episode, just a sideways brotherly compliment.
Thanks.
But let's go on.
Yeah.
Let's go on.
So they have their the Jews have their origin story. God has told them not to eat this apple, etc., and they eat the apple because in the form of a snake, Satan has poisoned their minds. They lose their innocence. They're kicked out of Eden. That is why Milton's famous poem, Paradise Lost, they are thrown on the earth. Then they have children and they reproduce, and you have different prophets who come at different time, including Noah, who saved the world from this flood, and so on and so forth. You know the story. And then finally you come to one origin story goes towards Abraham, one goes towards Moses. And they believe now, the scholars believe that these could be different origin stories because actually the Jews had been split into two kingdoms at one point, right? Israel was one, and then Zion was one, and so on and so forth. And at different times, there are two kingdoms, and there are one kingdom, and two kingdoms, etc.
How do you know so much? Like, how do you, like, it's books?
So all my life, what I've done is, partly that is that I've followed questions which. So I had two things, as I told you. I was a very curious kid. I was curious, and things troubled me until I knew the secret.
And you're able to retain all this?
I guess I have some ADD in which constrains me in some ways. That is, maybe I can't write papers as fast as people do. But one thing I was gifted with was a decent memory. So I could remember, especially things which touched me or which I was eager to learn or curious or emotional about.
You're built for this medium, by the way. Probably. You're talking about not writing papers like it's a curse, but this is the flip side of it.
For an academic, it can be a curse, but yeah.
You need someone to just hold you down and ask you questions, which is what we're doing. But
thanks, Ravi.
But go on.
Yeah. So you have these prophets coming, and they believe that, as I told you, that we believe that maybe these were two different origin stories of two different kingdoms of Jews. There is the Abraham story and the Moses story, and that's why they're both very important stories. Their children are different kinds of prophets. And then finally you arrive at the kings of these kingdoms. So one is King David. He also becomes a prophet, and he gets also not every prophet gets scripture. So a prophet is a messenger of God. God gives him a message. But not every messenger of God has a written script and a written text, a scripture. So Moses has, say, the Torah. He gives the law. Basically, it's the law of the Jews. The
10 Commandments.
10 Commandments. David has the Psalms of David. Right? And
Psalm is like a poem.
Poem of Solomon and David. So but some prophets don't get a written text. So in Arabic, the word used for prophet is Nabi. Nabi is just the messenger of God. These are all Nabis. They acknowledge the Nabis which came before. Rasul are prophets who have been given a scripture. So Moses is a Rasul. Prophet Muhammad is a Rasul. Rasul is one who gets the scripture from God. So basically a way of also saying that, okay, this culture is now literate. It is has script. But what happens is, as I told you, after the Torah is probably an oral tradition, but after Cyrus the Great and after the return from Babylon, it becomes a written tradition. The Jews have their own kingdoms, etc. Then the Romans conquer them. Then the second expulsion happens. The Romans, after the second or third revolt, the Romans kick all of them out. The temple, which was the center of their religious life, gets destroyed. And where does this temple come from is very interesting. Does it have Zoroastrian origins, this temple? Or is it something else? Finally, you find that Jews are dispersed in a diaspora across the Middle East, across North Africa, Europe, and including Central Asia. By this time, Christianity has emerged. Coming to Christianity, what is Christianity? Christians originally are a sect of Judaism. Because who was Jesus? He was a Jew. Who were his main followers? They were all Jews. Peter, Paul, all these people were Jews. But what happens is three things happen. It becomes a religion of salvation.
What does that mean?
That is how to save your soul. How to go to heaven, how to redeem yourself, how to so now Jews don't accept Jesus as a prophet or as a Messiah. even though there is a tradition that a Messiah will come among the Jews.
As in the other Jewish sects don't accept this particular Messiah.
The vast majority of them don't accept him as a Messiah. Though there is a tradition in Judaism that a Messiah will come, who will save us, who will restore us, because our kingdom has been destroyed, we have defeated people. This Messiah will come, he'll restore us, etc.
So that means that the modern day Jews still think that there's a Messiah who's yet to come.
Yes.
And they don't accept Jesus as that fill in the blank.
Exactly. And by the way, the Messiah has been predicted all the way back by Zarathustra. That's interesting, because Zarathustra said that a guy will come, he'll save the world, and he'll be born of a virgin. All these things are already there, and kind of, So you can see that actually the way stories and myths emerge, they have a life of their own and they continue in different forms.
You know what? We have the internet now, and a Hindu's learning about Islam, a Sikh is learning about Christianity, a Jain is learning about Judaism. Probably geographically speaking, back then, when modern day religions were originating, Abrahamic religions were originating, people didn't have access to this quantity of information. Obviously, there was no internet back then. So my question is again about the messiahs, that how did people readily agree to other people saying that, okay, I'm the messenger of God? And I'm sure there was resistance also faced.
As we believe that as people moved from hunter-gatherer to settle agriculture, their means of production, that is their technology, changed. Agriculture is a totally different technology. Just like industrial organization, industry is totally different. Industrial revolution changed our means of production and technology. So that also changes your society and your culture and your religion. And you start finding evidence of what is now a controversial term called the axial age. Okay, so a while ago, people used to term this period as the axial age. That is the transition towards higher civilization. So civilization begins with agriculture. Why do we say that? Simple reason. Before agriculture, everybody has to work to get food, etc. So you have a flat tribal structure of society. And everybody's involved in the production of food and clothes and everything. Once agriculture comes, a small percentage of the population is freed from the need to work for food, because the farmers are producing enough grains or sheep or cattle, whatever, to feed everybody. So now you will have specialized roles: a warrior, a priest, a bureaucrat, tax collector, king, etc., aristocrat. So you have now a more hierarchical society, which is not a good thing, but also a more productive society. So more is available for people. Population also explodes, increases, because now more people can live on a square piece of land. But also it leads to culture. That is, people can now devote themselves entirely to, say, producing literature and song. Philosophy, painting. People can do pottery, more specialized jewelry making. Different things can emerge. So you have development of what is called... Now, slowly what happens is also the complexity of your society is increasing. Society is becoming more complex, different kinds of people, slaves, this, that, different. Also, society is becoming larger because now your technology with the copper age and metal, iron age, etc., you now have the technology to farm larger areas and to make larger armies with more weapons. You can conquer more territory. So you're from having villages or city states, you now have kingdoms, maybe even empires. This completely changes, this complexity and size completely changes your need for religion. Now the old religion is not satisfying. Why? Because the old religion was actually a tribal religion. It was a cult. It was a, you had a totem, a tribal totem like we have in tribes. Or you had something which was a smaller thing, but the other tribe had a different cult. It had a different, but you are now part of the same system. You're part of the same, say, city state or kingdom or empire. So you need something more universal. Your morality cannot be only for your tribe. Because each religion also comes with a morality. It comes with a value system. It comes with economics, a certain economic system. But if you have so many different ones, you will have chaos and you will have conflict. And how will you trade and how will you be part of the same empire?
Which I feel is what's happening today as well.
Yeah.
Where so many people are talking about spirituality. They say I'm spiritual, not religious. But this is actually the formation of a new religion.
But the problem is that, and the good thing is about the present moment is that we have separated to some extent our economics and our law from our religion. In the ancient world, it was not like this. So we have a legal code, criminal code, a civil code, IPC, etc. We have laws for economics and trade. How you're going to
So countries are the new religion?
country nationalism is the new religion. Yes, I'll come to that. We'll come to that. Nationalism is a form of religion, actually, and I'll
Wow.
come to that how it is. But that's a whole different discussion. It'll take an hour to explain that.
That's another podcast.
Yeah, that's another podcast. So we have separated our religious beliefs from how we do our civil administration, our economics, our business. But in the ancient world, it was not like that. It was part of the same system. Your religion and your economics and your political system, they all went together. In fact, some people believe that the reason for religion was actually this. That is, how do you interact with a stranger? Suppose you follow the same religion, then you will be at peace. Otherwise, in hunter-gatherer societies, if two strangers met each other, they perceived such a huge threat from each other that immediately the action could become very violent.
Because culture was so different.
Culture was so different, and there was a threat because your values and your expectations were different. You were basically like two different animals who are facing each other in the forest for the first time. You don't know what to expect from him. But once you have the same culture and the same religion and the same values, because they come from the same, then you know what to expect and you trust each other. You will not immediately indulge in violence. You will maybe trade. So religion becomes a kind of way of also reducing the threat from the other and increasing trade and interaction, cultural interaction, etc.
Okay.
So as you become bigger, you need a religion which is more common to more people and whose values are more universal. That is, it can't be that because I am from this ethnicity, I don't value your life as equal, for example. No, we are both have to have something in common. So say, for example, we are both human beings. We say we are both human beings. We both have the same values. And hence, now we can now exist in the same system in terms of economics, politics, culture, etc. But for that, you need the same value system. So therefore, you need the same beliefs about reality, about God, about ultimate ends. So therefore, you need a common religion. So as society is becoming bigger, more complex, you need a common religion for practical purposes, but for another purpose also. That is, some people now have free time compared to others, these elites in the society. They are now indulging in more sophisticated thought about what are the ultimate ends of life. What does life mean? What is beyond this life? What are the goals? For a person who's struggling every day for survival, these ultimate ends are not important questions. He or she is struggling every day with the battles of the day. How to get food, how to ensure my child survives. If the child dies or my relative dies, how do I continue? These things are the main things which are occupying your mind. For that, any kind of a local cult would suffice. You're not sober, but then you get more deeper. So some people used to call these movements the axial age. The axial age being the age in which you move from one set of religions, which are these earlier religions, to a more sophisticated way of religions. That is, what are the most sophisticated religions? Vedant, the Vedantic religion. Ved ka ant, Vedant, that is, the more Upanishadic religion, more abstract thought. Or Buddhism is another example of a developed axial religion. More abstract thought, more worried about ultimate goals, a universal morality, not a tribal morality for all human beings, ultimate goals. So these are the axial age religions. Another example, for example, is Judaism. Judaism develops as a more, universalistic rather than a tribalistic religion, more a universalistic morality as Moses gives in the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not do this, thou shalt not do that. And so these are developing almost within 1,000 years of each other in the same kind of time period, roughly. Confucius in China gives you. So these are called axial age religions, right? Now we don't use the term axial anymore also because it is kind of discredited. Because earlier it was believed that this happened in a very narrow period of time, like maybe within 2, 3, 4, 500 years of each other. But now we have realized that actually it's much longer. In different civilizations, this happened at different times because different civilizations went through agriculture, empire building at different times. So this could have been spread over 1,000 or even 2,000 years because the Middle East developed and China developed earlier, then other parts developed later. So depending on when your part of the world went from agriculture to civilization, you went from the proto-religions, from the early religions, which could be ancestor worship or paganism or whatever, animism, totem worship, to these axial thought. Another very famous axial thought is Zoroastrianism. Another one which we find is the religion or the philosophy of Plato and Socrates. And I'll explain how that also is like an axial religion. Even though it's a philosophy, it's not about God.
It's talking about the meaning of life.
It's talking about ultimate ends, exactly. It's talking about a universal morality.
Mm.
Plato and Aristotle are talking about universal morality. They're talking about how to set up a state. So now you're dealing with much bigger questions, which would be required in a more sophisticated kingdom, empire, etc. So too with Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Vedantism. Vedantism, the Upanishadic religion, which is more abstract, it's about monism, meditation. It is very different from the Vedic religion, which is basically about sacrifice, ancestors, gods, This is a more abstract religion, right? And similarly, Buddhism also a more abstract religion. So it depends on the stage of civilization that you are, that your religion also and according to your technology becomes more sophisticated. Your means of governance also becomes more sophisticated. And that's why modern religions are even more different, because now technology has changed more. Our societies have changed even more. And similarly, our politics has also changed. We have other forms like democracy, etc. These are also technologies, but technologies of governance. Politics is a kind of technology of governance. Just as these new age religions that you talk about, these are technologies of spiritual satisfaction. New technology. Technology comes from the Greek word technike. Technike means the way of doing something. It can be applied to mechanical things, it can be applied to electronic things, it can be applied to politics, governance, religion, society. Why did suddenly prophets start appearing among the Jewish people only? It's a very strange question, very strange occurrence. The reason is that the Jewish people were undergoing a technological transformation, a social transformation, They are for the first time becoming a proper kingdom with proper systems in place. I told you the Judaic kingdoms, Samara, Judea, Israel, Zion, whatever you want to call it. At one stage, they are one, and then they become two, and then they become one and two again. You are now beginning to have a sophisticated people arising. Now, what these tribal cults that they had and the local gods that they have, Baal was a famous god, the calf, the golden calf which they worshipped, which Moses tells them to not worship this calf anymore. He comes down from the mountain, etc. These are all tribal cults, Maybe it was a totem of a tribe, the calf, the golden calf, etc. I don't know what it was exactly. But what happens is now they start saying, no, there has to be something beyond this. We have to also unite into one people as one kingdom, as I mentioned. And this is not satisfying also to some people, who have more time to think about this. So they are looking for something more abstract. And so this concept of Yahweh emerges. Yahweh being the supreme God who is unseen. In fact, his even name cannot be mentioned. We are saying Yahweh, but we don't know what Yahweh, whether they actually use the word, because he's so sacred that his name also cannot be mentioned. A kind of a predecessor to Allah or God. Yahweh emerges. And so if such a God emerges, some new laws have to be given for this new God. And these prophets are messengers, are coming from time to time and, serving both as community leaders, as moral educators. And also you have to realize that at this point, there is no judicial system. There's no judges, there's no Supreme Court and all of that. So these prophets serve as judges also. They are giving laws, they're serving as judges, they're serving as leaders in times of war, they're serving as guides, So we do actually, so as I said to you, we don't have actually physical evidence of either Moses or Abraham or anybody. Okay. These could also be stories which have been made in retrospect to justify your tribal identity, your ethnic identity. We do have evidence of Solomon, etc. These later prophets, who's a king also, Solomon, David, etc. And they are also considered prophets. So we do have some evidence, little bit fragmentary evidence of that. And then we come to, again, so this tradition continues, but it continues in a very narrow area, the area of this Israel, Palestine, these, Levant. Jesus emerges also in this area. The Jews don't accept him. We don't have actually really any contemporary evidence for Jesus also. The first mentions of Jesus are already, 60 or even later CE, Common Era. That is what would earlier be called 60 AD, 70 AD. Before that, there's no real mention at all. And in fact, even then, there is mention only of this new cult that has emerged. One of the historians, Josephus, etc., they mention that this new cult emerged. So we don't find any contemporary records of Jesus, which is surprising because the Romans were very good record keepers. We have records of lots of stuff. Even the Egyptians were not bad at record keeping, actually.
Maybe it was erased in order to stop the spread of Christianity.
At that time, it was hardly spreading. So, but record would anyway be there, right? So the story is that Jesus is caught by Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor there, and then he's crucified, etc. But no such records have been found contemporary. There's no such records of such a preacher teaching also. So we don't have records of this kind. But again, he fits into a tradition pre-existing among these people, the Jewish people. That is a prophetic tradition, right? And again, it's a time of hardship. So a Messiah would be more than welcome to save them from this Roman occupation and oppression. So to your answer, why such messiahs were coming up and why were they accepted by people? This is the long answer. It includes many things.
No, it's a nice answer. It also explains the need for religion. It explains a lot of modern day governance tricks if the relevant audience is listening. In terms of if you want to influence a large group of people.
Right. Yeah.
These are
and in fact, our politicians do that too.
Yeah, exactly.
They are like modern day prophets.
It's a huge reason I don't like following politics.
Yeah.
Because once you know the macro timelines of the human story, you realize that these people also know about those timelines and are simply using these tricks to control large masses of people. And in saying that, I'm a big fan of religion almost. Like I look at the spiritual side of like all these religions and I feel there's so much beautiful stuff to gain. Or maybe that's just me trying to settle my overactive mind.
There is a lot of beautiful stuff, but there's a lot of ugly stuff also and a lot of conflict also in every religion,
Every podcast I do leaves me with a kind of emotion. This one's left me with that whole thing about I feel like I've picked up the rock from the top of an iceberg. And there's like a whole iceberg to discover. Yeah. So I'm just going to say I'm looking forward to speaking to you more. We had scheduled you as a guest in order to learn more about Islam and have that put on the show as well, especially from a historical perspective, from a spiritual perspective. But we've gained even more than just one topic. I feel you're truly like a polymath and lots to dig up in that ADD inflicted mind. So thank you for being here, Mohsin sir.
Thank you, Ranveer. It was a pleasure. And I've learned from you.
I'm glad. Lots more to talk about. That's
great.
So that was the information-packed episode for today. When I read the book Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari, I felt similar to how you're probably feeling at this point after listening to this episode. When you learn about history in this much detail, it kind of changes your viewpoint on day-to-day life. When you next hear about religious conflicts in the news, when you're at a party the next time and you witness the interaction between people, when you witness people gossiping, you're going to look at the world differently. Possibly because of this conversation. Reading Sapiens had a very impactful effect on me, and meeting Mohsin Raza Khan had another impactful effect. He's going to be back on the show a lot. I'm sure that from this episode, you guys have now figured what Mohsin sir is capable of sharing with the TRS audience. So in the comments down below, give us your feedback on this episode. We have an entire special coming up on Islam with Mohsin Raza Khan. I highly recommend everyone checks that out. We've recorded one episode out of that series and it was fantastic, as information-packed as this one was. Need you guys to show TRS support in 2023. We're making it all about inter-religious studies from a historical perspective, at least to begin 2023. And I just want to thank you for helping us and supporting us through this fantastic year. Keep supporting us. Follow us on Spotify. Every episode's available on Spotify 48 hours before it's available anywhere else in the world. Make sure you download Level. Link is given down below. And Ranveer and the team will see you soon.